The house was still glowing from the wedding when my son said it, like he was reminding me to turn off a light I had forgotten. His voice calm, almost gentle, his new wife standing beside him with her bangles softly clinking, the smell of leftover sweets heavy in the air. "Mom, we don't need you now. You can go anywhere." Dear Mom. And for a moment, I honestly thought I had misheard him, because the words did not come with anger or shouting, or even discomfort. They came the way one talks about weather or traffic, ordinary, final, practiced. And my hands froze around the teacup I had been holding since morning, the tea long gone cold, my heart thudding so loudly I was sure they could hear it. Yet my face stayed still, trained by years of swallowing pain quietly, and before the silence could stretch too far, I simply nodded, because mothers learn early that dignity sometimes means not asking why. If stories like this touch something deep inside you, stay with me. Subscribe to this channel, because some truths take time to surface, and some wounds deserve to be heard gently. The wedding lights blinked behind them, small bulbs struggling to stay alive, and suddenly I noticed how the flowers on the wall were already wilting, their petals curling inward as if they knew celebrations never last. And my son would not meet my eyes. He kept looking past me, toward the future he had chosen, while his wife smiled politely, not cruelly, not warmly, but with the quiet confidence of someone who knows the house will soon belong to her alone. I walked back to my room slowly, each step echoing in a place I had built with my own hands. This same corridor where I once ran barefoot when he had a fever at midnight. This same doorway where I used to sit awake waiting for him to come home late from college, counting the minutes like prayers. And I closed the door behind me without locking it, because mothers never lock doors in their own homes, or at least they believe they never will. My suitcase lay under the bed, old and scratched, the same one I had carried years ago when life forced me to leave places without asking my permission. And as I pulled it out, dust rose into the air, making my eyes sting, or maybe that was something else. And my mind, unkind and relentless, began stitching memories together. His first cry, sharp and demanding, the weight of him against my chest when his father was already gone, the nights I skipped meals so he could eat properly, the day I sold my wedding bangles quietly and told him they had broken, all of it pressing against my ribs as if trying to escape. Outside my door, laughter drifted down the hallway, not loud, not cruel, just the sound of two people beginning a life where I was no longer required. And that hurt more than anger ever could. I folded my clothes carefully, not because I was neat by nature, but because I wanted to leave no sign of chaos behind. Each sari placed the way I used to place his school uniforms, smoothing wrinkles that no one else would notice. And with every fold, a memory surfaced, his small hand gripping my finger, his voice calling me from another room, "Mom, where are you?" And me always answering, always coming, because that is what mothers do. They come, even when no one is calling anymore. I paused when I reached the bottom of the suitcase, my fingers brushing against a thin envelope I had hidden there years ago, one I told myself I would open only if I ever truly needed it. And for a second I considered taking it out, reading it again, reminding myself why I had endured so much. But I stopped, because tonight was not about the past. Tonight was about understanding something far more painful, that the child you build your life around can one day decide you are excess baggage. From the other side of the wall, I heard my daughter-in-law's voice, low and careful, followed by my son's, and then a phrase that made my chest tighten. Something about, "once she settles somewhere," said casually, like a task already checked off a list. And that was when I realized this moment had not been born tonight. It had been growing quietly for months, maybe longer, while I was busy cooking meals, blessing their union, thanking God for his happiness, never imagining that my presence had become an inconvenience to be managed. I sat on the bed then, the mattress dipping under my weight the way it always had, and looked around the room, The small cracks on the wall I never repaired because money was better spent on his future. The calendar still turned to last month because I had been too busy with wedding preparations to notice time moving forward without me. And for the first time, a strange thought settled in my mind, soft but unsettling, that love does not always age into gratitude. When I finally stood up, my legs felt weak, not from age, but from the effort of standing tall when everything inside you wants to collapse. And as I zipped the suitcase shut, the sound seemed too loud, like an announcement I was not ready to make. Yet no one came, no one asked where I was going, no one said stay, and that silence told me more than words ever could. I opened the door and stepped into the hallway, pausing just long enough to take one last look at the living room where his wedding photos were already framed, his smiling face frozen beside hers, a future captured without any space left for the past. And as I turned away, I felt something shift inside me. Not anger, not hatred, but a quiet understanding that this was not just a goodbye to a house or a role. This was the beginning of a truth I had carried for years, one that I had buried deep for his sake. And as I crossed the threshold with my suitcase trailing behind me, I did not yet know where I was going, but I knew one thing with painful clarity. The moment a son tells a mother she is no longer needed is never as simple as it sounds, and some stories only begin when a mother walks out without looking back. I did not go far that night, not because I had nowhere to go, but because my body refused to accept how suddenly my life had been folded and packed into one small suitcase. And as the auto rickshaw rattled through streets still buzzing with wedding music from other houses, I kept my eyes on the passing lights, afraid that if I looked inward even once, I might unravel completely. So I ended up at my sister-in-law's place, a narrow apartment that smelled of boiled rice and old incense, where she welcomed me with concern but no questions, the way people do when they sense something fragile they should not touch yet. And I slept on a thin mattress near the window, staring at the ceiling fan as it creaked above me, counting its slow turns, remembering how I once rocked my son to sleep with the same rhythm, round and round, whispering promises I believed would last forever. Morning came without mercy, sunlight spilling in like an accusation, and as I sat up, my bones aching from the floor, I realized how quiet my phone had been. No missed calls, no messages asking if I had reached safely, just silence. And that silence pressed harder than any harsh word ever could, because it confirmed what I had feared all along, that my absence had already gone unnoticed. As I washed my face at the sink, cold water shocking me awake, memories rose uninvited, not sweet ones, but the kind that demand to be acknowledged. The years after his father died, when the world shrunk to survival, when I learned how to stretch money the way others stretch time, when I worked stitching clothes late into the night, fingers raw, eyes burning, telling myself it was temporary, that one day he would stand tall and say, "I'm here now, Mom," and take the weight from my shoulders. I remember the night he fell sick with a fever so high I thought I would lose him, running barefoot through rain to borrow money for medicine, praying to a God I wasn't sure was listening, promising anything in exchange for his breath. And he lived, of course he did, strong and bright, while I quietly paid the price in ways no one ever counted. By afternoon, my sister-in-law had left for work, and I sat alone by the window, watching people pass below, strangers with places to be, families moving together, and for the first time it struck me how invisible I had become, how easily a life built entirely around someone else can vanish once that center shifts. I decided I could not stay there long, not because I was unwelcome, but because I had learned over the years that charity, even from family, carries a weight of its own, and so I found a small rented room near the old market, a place barely big enough for a bed and a chair, the walls stained with years of other people's lives, the landlord handing me the keys without curiosity, and as I set my suitcase down, I felt something unfamiliar settle in my chest. Not fear, but a strange hollow freedom. That evening, as I unpacked, My hand brushed against the envelope again, the same one I had hidden away so carefully, and this time I did not pull back because distance has a way of loosening the knots we tie around painful truths, and I sat on the edge of the bed holding it, feeling its thinness, its weight heavier than it should have been, remembering the day I sealed it, my hands trembling, my decision firm yet devastating, choosing silence because I believed it was love. I did not open it yet, but I knew that whatever was inside had shaped my son's life in ways he never understood, and the realization sent a chill through me, because I wondered if his rejection of me was not just cruelty or influence, but something darker, something rooted in a past he didn't know he was standing on. Days passed slowly after that, each one stretching long and quiet, my routine reduced to simple things, walking to the market.
The room I rented had a single window that looked out onto a narrow lane where people passed without ever looking up. And over the next few days, I began to understand how easily a person can fade into the background when no one is searching for them. Because life outside moved on at its usual pace, while mine seemed to pause, suspended between what I had been and what I was being quietly pushed to become. And it was in that pause that the true eviction began, not from a house, but from a role I had lived inside for decades. My phone stayed mostly silent, except for brief, practical messages from my son asking where certain documents were kept, never asking how I was, never saying my name the way he used to when he needed comfort, and each message felt less like concern and more like inventory, as if I were a cupboard he was emptying room by room. I answered politely because confrontation had never been my language, but with every reply I felt a small part of myself being erased, reduced to usefulness, measured only by what I could provide, even from a distance. One afternoon, I went back to the house to collect a few remaining things they had told me I could pick up, choosing a time they said would be convenient, and when I stepped inside, the air felt unfamiliar, as if it had already forgotten me, the furniture rearranged slightly, my corner chair gone, the wall where our family photos once hung now bare, and it struck me how quickly a space can be rewritten once permission is given. My daughter-in-law greeted me with a practiced smile, her tone polite but firm, guiding me through rooms like a visitor, not like someone who had built every inch of that home with her patience and worry. And my son hovered nearby, avoiding my eyes, his discomfort more painful than open hostility. As I gathered my belongings, small things mostly, books, a shawl, a few utensils I was oddly attached to, I noticed how my presence seemed to interrupt their rhythm, conversations stopping when I entered a room, glances exchanged when they thought I wasn't watching, and it became clear that my removal was not just desired, it was necessary for their version of peace. At one point, my daughter-in-law gestured toward a box and said softly, "We kept everything important for you," and the word important hung in the air, sharp and selective, making me wonder who decided what parts of a life were worth keeping. As I was about to leave, my son finally spoke more than a sentence, telling me it was better this way, that couples need space, that I would adjust, his words sounding rehearsed. And when I asked him quietly if I had done something wrong, he shook his head quickly, saying no, but his eyes flicked toward his wife before returning to me, and that single movement told me everything I needed to know about where decisions were now being made. Outside, as I waited for a ride, I heard them laughing inside, the sound muffled by walls that had once carried my lullabies, and something hardened inside me then, not into bitterness, but into clarity, the understanding that love given without boundaries can become something others feel entitled to reshape. Back in my room, I unpacked the last of my things, noticing how little of my life I had actually taken with me, and as I placed the envelope on the small table beside the bed, I finally opened it just enough to see the top page, not to read it fully, but to remind myself that it existed, that there was a truth I had protected all these years, one that could not be boxed up or thrown away, and that knowledge steadied me in a way nothing else had. That evening, a knock came at my door, unexpected and light, and when I opened it, A young man stood there holding an envelope addressed to me in unfamiliar handwriting, saying it had been delivered to the wrong place earlier, and as I thanked him and closed the door, my hands trembled, because the name written there was not just mine, it was my maiden name, one I had not used in decades, one my son had never known. And in that moment, the lane outside seemed suddenly too quiet, the walls too thin, and I realized that whatever had been set in motion by my departure was already reaching further than I had anticipated. I sat down slowly, the envelope resting in my lap, unopened but heavy with implication. And for the first time since my son told me I was no longer needed, I felt something close to fear, because silence had protected us once, but now it was drawing attention, and attention has a way of uncovering what was meant to stay hidden. I left my small rented room early the next morning, the city streets already alive with people hurrying to jobs, shops opening, children laughing, and I realized with a strange heaviness that even here, among strangers, I was being watched in ways I couldn't name. It was not fear exactly, but an unease that crept along the back of my neck like a cold draft. I moved slowly, buying vegetables from the same vendor I had visited for days, feeling his curious eyes linger a moment too long, noticing how he whispered something to the woman beside him when I walked away, small gestures that made my chest tighten. Each night in the thin quiet of my room, I began replaying conversations I had once thought inconsequential, realizing now they were seeds of something deliberate. A question from my son about a bank document, a casual remark about the house's future, a fleeting comment from the daughter-in-law about settling things. And the pattern was clear. Their plan was unfolding while I had been packing and unpacking, while I had been obeying the polite distance they demanded. I wandered the streets alone that evening, seeking distraction in the rhythm of life outside, feeling the pulse of the city as if it were a heartbeat that might remind me I was still alive. And yet, in the quiet moments, I sensed my own invisibility, the way a shadow moves unnoticed, the way a life once central can suddenly feel like an extra in someone else's story. By the third day, I had begun visiting the small tea shop near the lane, a dim corner where I could sit and watch people without being seen myself. And it was there that I noticed it, the subtle glances of someone who knew me, someone who recognized not just my face, but the story I carried, the weight of a life no longer acknowledged by those who should have treasured it. My mind drifted back to the wedding, to the words that had struck me like cold steel. "We don't need you now." And I realized that this was not a temporary feeling of displacement. This was a quiet eviction from the life I had built, one that was methodical, calculated, and coldly efficient. That evening, as I returned to my room, a letter slid under the door caught my eye, its handwriting unfamiliar yet strangely precise, addressed simply with my name. No greetings, no explanation, just a weight that seemed almost tangible. Inside, I found a few lines hinting at secrets long buried, fragments of truths that suggested my son's marriage, my displacement, and the sudden erasure of my presence were not just matters of pride or personal space, but moves in a far larger game, one I had been unaware I was playing in. I sat on the edge of the bed, the envelope trembling in my hands, reading and rereading every line, sensing the silent eyes of unseen watchers, understanding suddenly that even my departure had been noticed, tracked, expected. Sleep did not come that night. The city's distant hum turned into a low, insistent murmur, filling the room with questions I could not yet answer. The next morning, I ventured further from the lane, tracing old routes I had once walked with my son, now observing them as a stranger, aware that each familiar corner had changed since my departure, carrying new ownership, new claims, and yet shadows of the past clinging to walls and benches and windows. By midweek, subtle messages began to arrive at my door, notes left under the mat, a text from an unknown number asking questions about events long ago, each one calculated, deliberate, and unsettling, confirming that the world I had thought quiet was in fact active, that my absence had triggered ripples I could neither ignore nor fully comprehend. The knowledge that someone else had been quietly orchestrating, watching, waiting, began to sharpen my awareness, the way a mother's instincts always do. And though I did not yet know who, I knew that this was not mere coincidence, that my son's words were the final stroke, but not the beginning of this plan, and that perhaps the truth I had buried so carefully was already moving in ways I could not yet trace. I sat by the window that evening, staring at the fading light, the envelope from days earlier still unopened on the table beside me, and for the first time since my son told me I was no longer needed, I felt something close to fear, because silence had protected us once, but now it was drawing attention, and attention has a way of uncovering what was meant to stay hidden.
That night, I finally opened the envelope I had carried with me for years, the one I had hidden so carefully, and as my fingers unfolded the thin paper, I realized immediately that what I held was more than just words. It was a key to everything my son had never known, a truth I had buried to protect him, a secret that had shaped his life without his awareness. The handwriting was my own, trembling the day I had sealed it, each sentence a careful balance of honesty and concealment, telling a story that was as much about survival as it was about love. I remembered why I had written it, to shield him from a mistake I had once made, a choice that, if revealed, could have destroyed the fragile world we had built after his father's death. Yet tonight, as I read, the meaning shifted. I understood that the same silence that had protected him also gave power to those around him now, the daughter-in-law, the people quietly observing, the son himself, who wielded my absence like a weapon I had not foreseen. My heart ached, not with anger, but with the awareness that my lifelong sacrifices had been used as a foundation for decisions that did not honor them, that my love, which had been given freely, had been taken for granted, and now my presence, or absence, was part of a calculated design. The envelope revealed hidden bank accounts I had never mentioned, documents of property transfers I had kept secret to avoid burdening him with knowledge too early, letters from people long gone, whose opinions shaped parts of his identity, and each revelation hit me like a wave, a mixture of fear and clarity. I realized that my son's casual dismissal had not come from cruelty alone. It had come from the assumption that he could navigate life without ever confronting the truths that had built him, and in that assumption lay a dangerous ignorance. For the first time, I saw him not as my child, the boy I had carried, scolded, guided, loved through sleepless nights and endless sacrifice, but as a man shaped by decisions made without his full understanding, decisions that I had once made to protect him and that others had now leveraged to remove me from his life entirely. My mind replayed past conversations, casual remarks he had made about inheritance or trust, questions about documents he thought were mundane, and the pieces fell into place with chilling precision. His wife had known, had watched, had measured every move I made, and my son, for all his innocence, had become complicit in their quiet removal of me. I sat on the edge of the bed, the envelope trembling in my hands, knowing that this was no longer just about eviction or insult, it was about control, about erasing the influence of someone who had been central to his life, someone who had made him strong without expecting recognition. I felt a surge of resolve, a quiet but unshakable awareness that whatever had been set in motion around me would not succeed without challenge. There was danger in revealing the contents of the envelope, risk in even acknowledging its existence, yet a part of me understood that power and knowledge are inseparable, and if I chose silence, I would allow the invisible architects of this betrayal to continue shaping my son's life without conscience or oversight. I spent hours sitting with the truth, letting it sink in, tracing every connection, imagining every outcome, weighing each decision with the patience learned from decades of sacrifice, until the night deepened and the city outside fell quiet. Somewhere between fear and determination, I knew that I had to observe first, gather evidence of what had been done and who was orchestrating it, because my son's ignorance could not shield him forever, and my absence, though quiet, was drawing attention that I could now use to my advantage.
I felt the subtle thrill of strategy, the strange empowerment of realizing that the years of careful concealment had created not vulnerability but leverage, and I promised myself I would not act recklessly but deliberately, because mothers who have given everything do not vanish quietly. They wait until the right moment, and then they strike with the force of truths long kept. By dawn, I had formed a plan to begin watching, questioning, connecting dots, and preparing for the moment when knowledge could confront ignorance, when hidden truths could meet arrogance, when a mother's quiet strength could remind a son of the price of love and betrayal. And as I leaned back in the narrow chair of my small room, the envelope safely folded beside me, I understood with icy clarity that my story was no longer about being cast out. It was about the power of the secrets we carry and the reckoning that will follow when they are finally wielded with intention. The day I saw him again, it wasn't a confrontation I had sought, not yet, but an observation, a test of the man my son had become without truly knowing me. He walked through the streets as if the world belonged entirely to him now, his posture confident, his eyes alert, and yet there was something in the way he paused at certain corners, the way he hesitated when a familiar shopkeeper nodded, that betrayed a faint, unacknowledged memory of a life I had shaped for him. I did not call out, did not approach. I simply watched from a distance, the envelope tucked into my bag like a talisman, a reminder of the truths he had never been given the choice to understand. And as I followed quietly, I noticed how his wife moved beside him, directing conversation, gestures, even his glances, guiding him in ways that made my stomach twist with a mixture of fear and recognition. This was no casual independence. This was orchestration, a careful choreography designed to erase me from his world entirely. That evening, I waited near the market where we had once shopped together when he was a boy, imagining the laughter and small arguments, the warmth of shared meals, the simple comfort of a life where my presence had been unquestioned. And when he appeared, alone for the first time, the realization struck me sharply. He was not the son I had raised, or at least not entirely. He was someone shaped by convenience, guided by the ambitions of another, untested by the truths I had kept to protect him. And when I approached him slowly, careful to maintain calm, when he noticed me, his eyes widened, not in recognition at first, but in calculation, scanning, weighing, as if trying to measure the threat I might pose. "Mom," he said, voice even, polite, and for the first time in weeks, I felt the cold distance of the words, the subtle message behind them. "We are not equals here." "I didn't expect to see you," I replied, gently, letting the weight of the past settle between us, my tone calm, measured, because mothers know how to carry storms silently. He shifted slightly, uncomfortable, glancing at the envelope peeking from my bag, though I made no move to show it. I could see it in his eyes, that flicker of unease, the sudden awareness that the life he assumed he fully controlled was built on layers of truths he had never been given, and I realized then that the son I had always known, the boy who clung to my hand in the rain, who begged me to stay when nightmares came, was hidden beneath the man he had become, someone who had grown confident in ignorance, but vulnerable once knowledge threatened him. Our conversation was minimal, polite, yet loaded, and I carefully let slip small references, questions about documents, casual mentions of old decisions, each one deliberate, designed to unsettle without revealing the full picture. His jaw tightened imperceptibly, a subtle twitch that told me he understood more than he would admit, that he felt a shadow of the responsibility I had carried for him all these years. He warned me softly, almost fatherly, in the way one might caution a stranger. "Mom, some things are better left buried." I nodded, smiling faintly, acknowledging his concern but not conceding to it, because I have spent a lifetime learning that words like these carry both fear and challenge, and the challenge is often where power quietly lies. As I walked away that night, shadows stretching long along the cobblestones,
I knew that he had felt my presence, had recognized that the calm exterior I maintained was not weakness, and that my silence, long assumed, now had the potential to confront, to reshape, to remind him of the foundations upon which his life had been built. I felt a subtle satisfaction, not of revenge, but of clarity, understanding that the game had shifted. No longer was I simply the displaced mother. I was now an observer with insight, an unacknowledged authority in a story they thought I had left behind. And in that quiet moment, walking under the dim streetlights, I understood with icy clarity that my story was no longer about being cast out. It was about the power of the secrets we carry and the reckoning that will follow when they are finally wielded with intention.
The days that followed were spent in quiet calculation, not in anger, because I had learned over decades that anger is loud but fleeting, whereas patience, observation, and timing hold a weight that cannot be ignored. And I spent hours revisiting every memory, every choice, every decision I had made for him, weighing them against what had been taken from me and what had been hidden from him. Understanding that the moment for action would not announce itself, it would arrive quietly, like a shadow slipping through a door, and I had to be ready. I walked the same streets he walked, visited the same markets, observed the same people, piecing together the rhythm of his new life, noticing the way he interacted with those who advised him, the subtle influence of his wife in steering conversations, even the way his tone shifted when he believed no one was paying attention, small tells that revealed the map of his confidence and the cracks beneath it. Each night, I returned to my small room, sitting with the envelope I had long carried, reading passages I had hidden from him, lines written to protect, to shield, and now seeing them as tools, as leverage, as reminders that knowledge is power when wielded with precision. I realized that this choice, the one I had been forced into by his words, by his dismissal, was mine alone. I could confront, reveal, and risk shattering the carefully constructed world he now inhabited, or I could wait, observe, and allow him to stumble upon the truth, letting it settle in his life like a shadow that grows longer with time. Sleep became intermittent, thoughts circling endlessly. If I spoke too soon, I could undo him, hurt him, perhaps lose him entirely. If I waited too long, he could cement the false structures around him, and my absence would become permanent, unnoticed, untouchable. The tension built with every passing day, subtle but unrelenting, until I could feel it in the quiet of my own chest, a drumbeat of necessity that demanded recognition. I imagined approaching him gently, planting small seeds of awareness, questions that would stir curiosity, allowing him to reach the truth at his own pace. Yet in imagining, I saw the precarious balance. One wrong word, one hint too obvious, and the walls would close, the daughter-in-law's control would tighten, and I would be left invisible once more. And so I waited, letting him live, letting him believe, while I learned, mapped, and prepared. Because patience is the ally of a mother who has nothing left but the truths she carries. One evening, as I sat by the window, the city's muted sounds filling the room, I finally understood the quiet lesson of the past weeks. The reckoning would not be loud, it would be deliberate, inevitable, and it would arrive at the moment when he least expected it, when his confidence could be tested by the smallest truth. And in that realization, I felt a clarity I had never known before, a calm, resolute certainty that the life I had given, the love I had offered unconditionally, the sacrifices no one acknowledged, were not lost. They were waiting, quietly, to remind him that nothing survives without respect, that a mother's power is never truly gone, and that the consequences of taking her love for granted are patient, subtle, and inexorable. That night, I placed the envelope carefully on the table, closed my eyes, and let the weight of the coming days settle around me, understanding that the choice I had been wrestling with, the decision to reveal, to guide, to confront, was mine alone, and the story I had begun decades ago, the story of sacrifice, love, and silent strength, was about to reach a turning point that neither he nor anyone else could ignore. The day of reckoning arrived quietly, without fanfare, without the dramatic confrontation I had imagined, and in its subtlety lay the full force of what had been building for years. I had watched, waited, and learned the patterns of their lives, and now the consequences of my absence, my silence, and the truths I carried began to unfold naturally. My son, once so confident, now faced small, almost imperceptible challenges. Letters arrived he had not anticipated, questions were raised about documents he assumed were straightforward, whispers of histories long buried made their way back to him through channels he had never considered. I did not need to speak a word. The envelope I had carried, the knowledge I had preserved, and the quiet understanding of what had been hidden allowed events to reveal themselves in their own time. Slowly, he began to notice gaps, anomalies, small inconsistencies that unsettled his world. His wife's carefully constructed dominance faltered slightly under scrutiny. The polished confidence of their life together showed the first cracks. I watched from a distance, neither triumphant nor bitter, only steady, aware that the power of truth is patient. And then the moment came when he realized he had underestimated me, when the weight of decisions made in ignorance pressed down on him, and I saw it in his eyes, the faint recognition that love, once discarded, can never be erased entirely, and that a mother who sacrificed everything does not vanish quietly. There was no shouting, no dramatic confrontation, only the soft, undeniable understanding that some things, decades of guidance, protection, and quiet strength, cannot be ignored. I walked past him that afternoon, unseen in the crowd of daily life, yet fully present in the knowledge that he now knew, in a subtle, haunting way, the depth of what he had taken for granted. It was not revenge, it was justice measured in awareness, in the slow, inexorable return of recognition that cannot be faked, that cannot be avoided, that seeps into consciousness like light through a window long shuttered. I returned to my small room, placed the envelope back in its hiding place, and felt, for the first time in weeks, a sense of calm that was neither relief nor triumph, but the quiet satisfaction of a life reclaimed, of agency restored, and of love acknowledged in the only way it truly matters, through the awakening of truth. Outside, the streets moved on. People walked by unaware of the quiet resolution that had occurred, yet within me a chapter had closed and another begun, one in which I was no longer invisible, no longer discarded, and fully aware that the strength of a mother, the patience of one who has given all, can never be measured by words alone. In the stillness of that evening, as the sun dipped low and shadows stretched across the city, I finally understood the quiet lesson of the past weeks. The reckoning would not be loud, it would be deliberate, inevitable, and it would arrive at the moment when he least expected it, when his confidence could be tested by the smallest truth. And in that realization, I felt a clarity I had never known before, a calm, resolute certainty that the life I had given, the love I had offered unconditionally, the sacrifices no one acknowledged, were not lost. They were waiting, quietly, to remind him that nothing survives without respect, that a mother's power is never truly gone, and that the consequences of taking her love for granted are patient, subtle, and inexorable. That night, I placed the envelope carefully on the table, closed my eyes, and let the weight of the coming days settle around me, understanding that the choice I had been wrestling with, the decision to reveal, to guide, to confront, was mine alone, and the story I had begun decades ago, the story of sacrifice, love, and silent strength, was about to reach a turning point that neither he nor anyone else could ignore.